Shane, today's hot topic, we are talking wide receiver pivoting. How do we tier down at wide receiver for hashtag leverage? And specifically, we're going to be talking about that tier 2 at Dynasty wide receiver. So we're looking at the range of CeeDee Lamb, Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Chris Olave. We are tiering down. We are doing the old leverage trade. We are getting a lesser player, preferably a receiver, plus a future first-round pick, preferably 2024, could be 2025. So we're going to talk through that topic today. Initial thoughts on this topic. How do you feel about those 6 names? And again, I'll say them again. This is wide receiver 3 through 8 and keep trade cut. CeeDee Lamb, Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Chris Olave. We know if anybody has watched the stream, a couple of those guys are players Shane really likes.
Yeah.
How do you feel about tearing down off of those guys, Shane? How does that make you feel, and what do you think?
It makes me feel not good inside. I'm not going to lie to you. It's not something that I want to do, but I'll also say this. It's something that I have done in leagues when it's necessary, because sometimes, as much as I love tearing up, because I think it's easier, or at least it points to I'm winning. I'm going to win when I tear up and when I tear down, even if it's the right process move. And even if it's not really a step back, it feels like a step back a lot of times, which is why I think a lot of people don't like to do it. They're like, oh, I can't believe I'm giving up Chris Olave, for example. We'll just use him for no particular reason. I can't believe I'm giving up the wide receiver 5 in Dynasty football and getting back a lesser player and a first. It's hard sometimes to wrap your head around how that actually helps you. But it's something that I've done repeatedly, and I've been doing for, I don't know how long we've known each other. I think our very first interactions were talking about wide receivers and tearing down. I could be wrong, but it's not something that it feels intuitively good, but it is something that you might need to do.
So where have you actually been able to pull it off? What do the deals look like? And more importantly, what type of formats, what type of teams are you doing it with? If you're actively looking at one of those players and saying, you know what, it'd be nice if I could get a 2-for-1, and then we'll talk about some of the targets that you can go for once you've made that decision.
Right. So I guess A.J. Brown is a dude that, you can tear down from. A.J. Brown to Drake London and a 25 first. And I guess that's part of the conversation too. What are you willing to accept? Because a lot of times you want the 20, well, we're past 23. You want the next year's first, right? Because you want to start kick that rebuild into high gear, or add that functional piece to your roster as quickly as possible. And it's really difficult to talk yourself into how getting a pick at 25 is going to help. But something like that would definitely be something I entertain. A little lower down on the totem pole, man, it gets ugly quick as a problem with wide receiver, right? Because you get to that range where everybody's the same, from like 20 to 40, it feels like. But like Chris Olave for Jackson Smith and Jigba in a future first, it is something that, again, if you need to split the asset on your roster, and you should know if you're looking at your roster whether you need to split the asset or not, is something that I've thrown out there, something that I've done.
Yeah, I think the problem with a deal like that is at this point, Olave and JSN are essentially the same thing. You just haven't seen one play. I think to really get this done, it's got to be a league where, A, you're shy on assets. You're looking at your team, regardless of whether this is a 12-team start 9 or a 12-team start 11. The first thing you have to answer is, why am I doing this? Because to be fair, part of the reason why I would consider doing this is because we know one of those 6 receivers, I can almost guarantee is not going to produce inside the top 10, top 12. 1 or 2 of them, you're going to go, okay, he was wide receiver 15, which was the same as a lot of the players you're tiering to. That's part of the reason why you make this bet, is you essentially add a free asset, and you're just betting that the production that you're losing is much closer together, and it's probably in that flat zone where it really isn't moving the needle whether you have wide receiver 10 or wide receiver 20. It really isn't. If you go back and look historically at how that contributes to a good team, doesn't matter all that much. So you're essentially just exploiting the fact that there's a value gap there. So then it comes down to the names that you're willing to accept. I do think it is harder to make this deal if you're asking for Drake London or Jackson Smith and Jigba, because they are also young pieces that maybe their situation or their current market price is not nearly as strong. Mm-hmm. But that's an aggressive tier up.
Well, would you want to do something, or would you be okay with doing something, even adding a second to your side? So say you're doing Chris Olave in a second for Drake London in a first.
Personally, I want the leverage. I want the two pieces. I want the second because I want to get greedy with the second and be able to use it at another time for something else. Because that's sure it's a second, but that forbids me from using a second and adding it to a player later to maybe get a first. So I'm limiting some of my flexibility because you can also go the other way. If I wanted to tier up at wide receiver and I'm looking at a really good team, 12 teams start 10, and I have Drake London, would you add Drake London and a first to get CD Lamb in a second?
Me? No.
Yes. Okay.
Probably
but my point is people would look at production and say, you know what? If I have a good team and I'm adding a more productive receiver who I think in 2023 is going to be better than Drake London, and I'm getting back a second, I may actually do that deal because I figure I'm trading away 109, 110, 111, 112 next year, and I'm getting back 205. Is that big of a gap to where I'm really losing the difference in what I think the production could be? So I think you're more willing to actually make the up tier bet when you can add the second, which makes me not want to do it when I'm doing the down tier trade.
Because the thing about that is, and I talk about this a lot, is the psychological impact of a first versus a second, right? So just even in season, let's say if things hit well, say I pulled this trade off and I had that first. Or just look at it from just without even looking at that trade perspective. What's easier? What's going to get me a better asset in season if I need it when I'm trying to win? The first or the second? It's the first. Even if someone were to take the time and look at it and go, wait, that's probably going to be the 108. You know what I mean? It's still going to have that psychological impact of, well, this is the first. This isn't a second round pick. It's worth more. And then when I'm trying to say, even if I don't win this year, I take a step back this year, there's something about being able to bundle multiple firsts as opposed to a first and a second. Like, when you get a trade offer and it's a first, two firsts, and even if one of them's 110, let's say 104, 110 versus a first and the 205, it feels 1,000% different because it has that first in front of it. Like, it just feels different and it looks different and it hits differently.
So let's talk format here, because obviously in a shallower format, let's call it start 9 or start 10, I would consider the deal where I am tiering down, giving the second and getting back the first, because you're probably looking at the cutoff as to what quote unquote matters being a lot easier to hit when I have an extra first. Start 11 or start 12, I honestly don't mind having the second, because if the market kind of understands that it is a start 11 or start 12, the second can probably buy me a starter. Now, is the second going to buy me as good of a starter as maybe a first would? No, I'm not saying that. But I feel like the second holds more weight to where I'd be more likely to make the bet that I feel is really strong on two receivers for the up tier in a start 11 if I'm getting the second back, because now I still have a placeholder asset that I can trade. In a start 9 or start 10, I'm fine with, I'm saying, okay, if I can tier down from Jalen Waddle and I get Brandon Ayuk, or I get even one of the older guys like Cooper Kupp or something like that, I will make the swap, bank the first, and know that I probably have to add that first to something to even find an upgrade somewhere in a start 9 or start 10 anyway. So I'd rather have the first in that case when I know I'm going to have to combine it to something in the future to actually get a piece that moves the needle. I'd rather bank the first. Deeper leagues, I kind of like the seconds because I do think they're more fungible on the open market. It's not a first, but it's not nothing. So I think that is the difference between. But also, very hard.
But also, when we're talking seconds in like a deeper league, we want multiple seconds, right? As opposed to like,
sure.
Again, we're talking like I'm trying to get multiple seconds for that first, like. In a situation, let's just say that same format, like obviously you would take the 202 and the 205 over the 110. You know what I mean? Something like that.
In a start 11, I actually look at picks more like, okay, where is the track of how they place in my lineup? So in a start 11, I'm kind of looking at like half the second round picks are in my lineup. I don't want to have to draft them into my lineup. We know that's very hard. Even in a start 12, it's very hard to draft players and have them go into your lineup. But I think the asset means more in one of those leagues. I mean, clearly we know that, start 11, start 12, we'd much rather have seconds and thirds than, we would have fourths, but we'd rather take those than take them in a start 9 or a start 10. So I think it's just, you got to know your format. I don't think you're right or you're wrong or I'm right or I'm wrong. I think it's more of know the format and where it makes sense to try for the 2-for-1 and know what format makes sense to ask for the second back or be willing to give the second back. So let's just talk the players you're willing to go to. And these are, I just want to preface this. These are almost regardless of where your team is at. The goal of this type of trade is to accumulate assets. It is not to, you're playing the market a little bit. You're trying to get off of a receiver that you think is a little risky at the current price and buy somebody that you think is good at maybe a depressed price. But the goal here isn't like, I know if I'm trading Jalen Waddle for Brandon Ayuk, I'm probably losing some points between Jalen Waddle and Brandon Ayuk, but it's not enough given what I'm going to get back if I can get the extra piece. So let's just rapid fire the names. You already mentioned A.J. Brown. Any others in there? We know your love for Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. What about those other three? Waddle, Lamb, Amon-Ra, St. Brown. How would you rank those between the ones you'd want to tier off of the most to the least?
Yeah, and this is personal preference. Waddle, I'd like to move off of most. Probably then Amon-Ra, St. Brown, then CD Lamb. And Amon-Ra, St. Brown is my own personal blind spot more than anything, I think. I know he's had two elite seasons. I hate using this. He feels like a guy that is playing over his skis right now. It feels like that could bottom out for him. Like he feels like, to me, he's more of a 80 reception, 900 yard guy, which isn't bad, right? But I don't know that I actually can still truly buy into him as a wide receiver, an elite wide receiver one. But, the market kind of disagrees with me there, which is good because then I can tear off of him. Waddle, I think you are the one that's put it in my head to be concerned about him. And again, concern, it's a relative concern. I'm not trading this dude for, Jerry Jeudy and a second rounder. But relative at this elite level, he's definitely behind Olave. He's definitely behind Wilson, definitely behind A.J. Brown, and probably CD Lamb.
Yeah, there's just not I think Amon-Ra is the top of my list only because I don't think the market likes him nearly as much as they like Waddle.
Right.
But also his archetype, you don't see a lot of guys with his archetype that end up being consistent, like top 6 receivers. You basically have like Cooper Kupp, Keenan Allen, and like those guys are probably two of the best like target hogs that we've seen. Now, Amon-Ra has been that thus far, but it's also hard to just project that to continue. It's hard to say, yeah, this guy's going to have Keenan Allen's career, which at a time, Keenan Allen was a top 2 dynasty receiver. I don't know if anybody watching actually remembers that, but at one point he was an elite dynasty receiver.
Right.
He's still good. Like he's still playing. He still probably could be a top 24 receiver. But the point is you don't want to bet on that being what looks like to get you to like ceiling. So I agree with Amon-Ra being the one I would pivot off of. We're going to end it here. We're just going to go through some names. We're going to do 12 teams start 10. So not a start 9. I think start 9 is a cop-out where you're going to be really hard-pressed to ever really want to do a tier down in a start 9. Start 11, it's really easy to accept some tier downs too, especially when you lack assets. You're like, oh, I'll take a first and I'll make that trade. So start 10. So you're going to have to kind of play in the middle a little bit and truly pick a side. So I'm going to give you a tier down. You have the option of all 3. So Lamb, well, we'll say 4. Lamb, A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jalen Waddle. I'm just going to give you the names. Are you willing to accept a 25 first or a 24 first? And if it's only one or the other, say which one. And I'm just going to throw out the tier down names, and I'm going to start lower than you're probably comfortable with. So we'll make this one easy. Well, no. We're going to start with any of those 4 for DK Metcalf and a first.
No.
None.
Nah, you know what? You could, Amon-Ra St. Brown, you could get off of me for DK Metcalf and a first.
Do you care what year?
Yeah, I want a 24.
So 25 would be maybe the line breaker?
25 would be the line breaker. Again, if I'm absolutely piss poor at assets, though, I could definitely see doing that.
So thoughts on any of the other old productive guys, Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, or Tyreek Hill?
Taking them straight up for one of the younger bucks?
Nope. You get the first, and maybe you get the second back. Maybe it's CD Lamb for Stephon Diggs and a first.
Oh, yeah, I'm smashing that. I'm smashing that for Tyreek Hill, Steph Diggs. Devontae Adams was probably the one that I don't even know if you said his name. I already forgot.
I excluded him because I think you can get that type of deal done. Cooper Kupp, I think, is another one that is a little riskier, but yeah, you can still do it.
Cooper Kupp's probably the one that's bordering the line, right? Because, again, maybe it's my blind spot, but it just feels like, and they're all in that same age range, really. Steph Diggs is the youngest, right? I mean, I think you'd have to process-wise, you'd have to take a 24 first and one of those players for any of the other guys, because the production is going to be similar, if not better, actually, from the guys you're getting. Like Tyreek Hill is probably, and Cooper Kupp, if healthy, will outproduce everyone that I love right there. It'd hurt giving up a 23-year-old wide receiver that just smashed in his rookie season, in Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave, or even younger than that. I wouldn't be purposely looking for it, but I would do it.
Yeah, I think you have to make the trade if you're betting against these receivers. Part of what you're betting on is that their value exceeds what their production is going to be. So even if you get 1 to 2 years of production, the process makes sense. Even if you're getting back a guy that in 2 years you're not going to be able to trade, but you might get 2 multiple top 12 seasons out of from Diggs or from Kupp or from Tyreek Hill. So consider that. So in honor of trades in 5, we're going to do 5 more. And they're just going to be yes or no's.
Yes.
If you have any context, like 25, but not 20 or not 24 or 25, I wouldn't do 24. I would.
Okay.
Let me know. So I'm going to give you 5 names. We're going to go a little bit lower. Jordan Addison.
Yes.
Brandon Ayuk.
Again, this is any of the because you know who he keeps. Sorry, yes or no. Amon-Ra St. Brown's the one that keeps popping in my head when I say yes.
DJ Moore.
No.
Jerry Jeudy.
No.
Last one, Christian Watson.
Amon-Ra. Yeah, just for context, anyone watching this video, when I say yes, it's specific to Amon-Ra and all these ones. So yes.
We're going to pull back just real briefly, and we're going to insert the name Chris Olave. Is the answer no for all of those?
It's a hard no.
All of them.
Who was the first guy?
The first one was Jordan Addison.
Yeah, no.
All right.
No.
Well, Shane has spoken. Shane is not nearly on the tear down aggression like I am. I am pretty much willing to do all of these, especially if the format gets to a point where that extra asset can actually get you more down the road.
Right.
Really, all you're betting with this is you are tearing down in a range of guys that we don't think can get to that 20 point per game range like Jefferson and Chase have. Now, no one talks about this, but there's a world where one of those guys doesn't just hit 20 points per game every year. But for the purposes of this, we're kind of talking about wide receiver 3 through wide receiver 8, pivoting down, picking up an extra first, getting the leverage. We really don't even care what team it's on. It's on a contender, non-contender. Where it makes sense to accrue dynasty value is all the time on any type of team. Think about it. Post deals, come to the next stream if you get any trades like this. But for the most part, as long as it's Amon-Ra St. Brown and as long as it's specific players that Shane likes the idea. But otherwise, I think we're in support of this type of trade when you're looking to add value to your dynasty team.